I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, we'll talk about 3 real paths the Steelers can take with or without Mike Tomlin that could turn their franchise around here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Now, as I said, this show is going to be completely about coaching and the coaching future of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we'll get to player stuff another day when we do our grades, but I feel like that is where the point of discussion needs to be in the city of Pittsburgh right now about how things will change there, because coaching is absolutely part of the problem the Steelers are dealing with right now. And we'll get to all of that in a second here. But first, speaking of coaches, I got to give a special shout out to the best coach I've ever known, my pops, my old man, my father, Leonard Carter, who got inducted into the Pittsburgh City League Hall of Fame this past weekend for his long coaching career at Peabody High School. Love you, Pops, and know that there are a lot of players out there who stop me every single month I'm out in the city of Pittsburgh and tell them how much they love you for changing their lives. Thank you, Pops, for everything that you do. So that was the happy part of this. Let's get to the not so happy part, because Steelers fans are miserable right now, and rightfully so. They're 7-7 after losing 3 terrible games. Let's get into the 3 paths I was talking about here. Again, with or without Mike Tomlin. And let's talk about the one that a lot of people in town want to talk about right now. And that's the obvious option on the floor, firing Mike Tomlin, which a lot of people are calling for. And I'm not even sure there's a lot of people, but people are loudly calling for now. There's to do this, if you're firing Mike Tomlin, you're cutting off the last year of his contract to find a new coach. Now, if you're cutting off Tomlin or trading him, we're not just firing him. We're throwing that in there as well. And we've talked about how trading coaches has never really worked for the team that traded away the coach. If you go back to the last 7 head coaches who've been traded since 1997, it hasn't really worked out for any of those teams. But let's skip all that. Let's say, hey, don't be afraid of how 7 other teams have failed and no other teams have succeeded. You're the Pittsburgh Steelers. You can find a way. 4 head coaching candidates that you could look here. 2 on offense, 2 on defense. 2 defensive minds, obvious one that everyone's going to talk about, Brian Flores, was just with the Pittsburgh Steelers, obviously has a connection with the organization, has a good reputation, turned the Dolphins from a laughingstock into a team with 2 back-to-back winning seasons. They're only back-to-back winning seasons for like a decade before he was let go, and for obvious problems that there was a lawsuit and all that stuff. But obviously Brian Flores is back on his feet and doing well, coaching the Minnesota Vikings defense and turning them from a mid defense into a better defense this year. Another defensive mind you could go get, Steve Wilks. Steve Wilks has head coaching experience, coached 1 year for a terrible Cardinals team and was trying to turn things around, never got that chance, was obviously a lame duck coach in the first place, and also got an interim head coaching chance with the Carolina Panthers and turned them into contenders for really the only time that they've had since they got rid of Ron Rivera for a quick second. And right now, Steve Wilks doing a very good job as the defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. But I know a lot of people are out there saying, Chris, we're tired of defensive coaches. Let's get offensive coaches. Okay, 2 offensive coaches, Ben Johnson, Joe Brady. 2 offensive coordinators right now that are kicking it and doing really well. Ben Johnson with the Lions, Joe Brady just promoted to OC from the Bills. That was always their plan. Both doing well. Both could be interesting hires that would put there. But bottom line, you do any of these moves, you're revamping the entire coaching staff. You're bringing in a whole new staff, and I think that what you'd be doing, and so whether you hire a defensive or an offensive-minded coach, you're bringing in the offensive coaching staff to make this a more modern offense, to make this a successful offense, and finally get some things going on that side of the ball, because it hasn't been going for about 3 straight years now. The thing is that obviously you're taking a risk on a new coach, and you don't know how they lead in that situation. You're also pigeonholing yourself into kind of a one-win scenario where you're saying, hey, we're getting rid of this coach and we're getting this coach, and either you get it right here or you start to become a bottom feeder and you start cycling through coaches every few years. just like a lot of bad teams. And now there's a lot of people in Pittsburgh who will say, oh, they're not afraid of that. They're not afraid of that. You've been a bottom feeder. We've been bottom feeders for years because we've been experiencing 9-8 seasons and things like that. And then no, you don't know what a bottom feeder is in the NFL if you actually think that. Bottom feeders are a lot of teams out there that haven't seen winning seasons for all but like 1 in 10 years. And a lot of people might point to, well, the Eagles, it worked for them because they fired Andy Reid. And look, it worked out for them. They won a Super Bowl. Well, that was also the third head coach that they had after Andy Reid. And it's also not the reality that that's the unlikely scenario. It's more likely to be like the many other franchises who fire their successful coaches and then don't get results from that. After the Rams fired Mike Martz in the early 2000s or the late 2000s, excuse me, they went 10 years without a winning season. 10 years with losing season, 13 years without a winning season. The Cardinals, since they traded away Bruce Arians, who made them relevant in the 2010s, they've had 6 years, 1 winning season since then. The Panthers, since letting go of Ron Rivera, and it was legit that they let go Ron Rivera because he had 3 losing seasons in his last 4 years. That's a situation where I think you do it. But since then, they've had 5 head coaches and they've had 5 losing seasons. Disaster there right now. Chicago Bears, since they fired Lovie Smith, by the way, after a 10-6 year, didn't understand why they did that. They've had 1 winning season in the last 10 years. The Commanders, they've had 2 winning seasons in the last 10 years, and those 2 winning seasons were 9-8 win seasons. The Jets in the last 10 years, 9 losing seasons. The Giants fired Tom Coughlin, a 2-time Super Bowl winning head coach. Granted, he had 3 losing seasons to end, so I get that. But in the last 8 seasons since they've gotten rid of him, they've had 6 losing records. Those are 2 reasons why the Rooneys don't fire recklessly. A, it's not how this franchise was built on its success. They held on to Bill Cowher when he struggled, and it worked out. And it led to them getting Tomlin eventually when Bill Cowher was ready to retire on his own standard. And I think they want to lean on that in this situation if it can work that way. But the other big thing that everyone knows is money. The Rooneys do not want to have to pay a head coach who they're firing because all their money is guaranteed while also paying for a new guy. So would firing Mike Tomlin be a realistic? Let's get real for a second. It's just highly unlikely. Whether you like it or not, whether you want it or not, whether you hate it or not, I just don't think it's the real situation that the Rooneys are doing here. They're not known for firing coaches and then owing them more money and paying a new guy to be head coach. At best, the Rooneys are going to wait it out and see how things go with Mike Tomlin's last year of his contract, which is next season. And so what do you do with that? Well, then you start to explore the second and third options that we have here. And part of that second option is keeping Mike Tomlin for a year and not extending him. We'll get to that in a sec. But if you do that, or even if you do extend him, whatever you do, you need a new offensive coordinator and probably a whole new offensive staff to fix things for the Steelers. And that could be the tricky part to pull off, because who is going to want to come in and try to start a whole new job as an offensive coordinator under a head coach who has 1 year left on his deal? Some people can see that as a lame duck year, and that can lead to getting bad candidates in your coaching search, and that can lead to another bad hire and another bad offense for years to come. I think there's a trick the Steelers can play to beat that problem specifically and get a good offensive coordinator who could give them multiple options on the back end if things do or don't work out with Mike Tomlin for the future. I'll get to those next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We got a lot to discuss. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find people that you want to talk to faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates that with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the quality candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our discussion about how the Steelers handle their coaching situation right now. We went over the first option of firing Mike Tomlin. So let's get to another option here of moving on with Mike Tomlin. Now, there's a few things that they could do because they need an offensive coordinator, and it wouldn't, and you put yourself in a position where you need to make some moves. So let's explore the offensive coordinator search here for a second. So if the Steelers are looking to get an offensive coordinator, it most likely cannot be, and it's most likely not going to be an offensive coordinator coming from a good offense, because lateral moves just don't happen from a good offense to a bad offense when you're just taking an offensive coordinator position. If an offensive coordinator is successful in their job right now as somewhere else like the Chiefs or the Dolphins or the Lions, they're moving up for head coaching jobs. They're not waiting around to take another offensive coordinator job in most scenarios there. So the only chance you get at a chance at a lateral move of getting an offensive coordinator who becomes your offensive coordinator is if there's a firing. We'll get to that in a minute because that's part of the trick I'm going to be talking about. But let's look at position coaches, quarterback coaches specifically, and passing game coordinators who you could promote to offensive coordinator on your team. And these are just some of the names that are out there. Miami Dolphins, Darrell Bevell, a guy who's had a track record. He's been an offensive coordinator for the Vikings, the Seahawks, the Lions, and the Jaguars. And with the Seahawks, he had a top 10 scoring offense for 4 straight years with Russell Wilson, Marshawn Lynch, and that crew when they were really good in the 2010s. But he's also had some terrible years with the Vikings, had some terrible years with the Jaguars, also plenty of mid-years. He's also 54 years old. It's like, nah, okay, I'm not feeling him as much. Maybe you're not there. The obvious candidate that everyone's going to want to talk about, Clint Kubiak, young guy, 36 years old, son of Gary Kubiak, obvious NFL coaching lineage. The Steelers have like lineage in a lot of their hires for a lot of things. Also has done a solid job as the 49ers passing game coordinator for their offense this year. So maybe he's a guy that's a hot candidate. And I think he's going to be a hot candidate very soon for anyone. So maybe you want to promote him before anyone else, and he could be your guy and try to bring some of that Kyle Shanahan offense to your system. An off the beat hire that you could do, the one that's a little bit, maybe not as obvious as a Clint Kubiak, a guy maybe like a Marcus Brady. He was offensive coordinator for the Colts for 2 years before they gutted their whole staff. And this year he's been a senior offensive assistant for the Eagles, helping Jalen Hurts out. And he's 44 years old. Maybe he can work. And okay, cool. All those options are there, but let's go back to what I said earlier about lateral moves unless there's a firing. Because remember, again, if you're a good OC from a good offense that's running a good offense, you're not leaving that good offense unless you're getting a head coaching job somewhere, or unless your head coach has been fired and then your staff is getting gutted and you need to find a new home. Ultimately, I think the Rooneys want to avoid another experiment like Matt Canada or just another experiment, period, at offensive coordinator. And they want to get a good offensive coordinator with a good record. So most likely you want to find an offensive coordinator that could still be really good, but just be being part of a staff that's just about to get torn apart because of their head coaching situation. So let's look at who's been fired or who's about to get fired at head coach that might open up a good offensive coordinator or a person you think could be a good offensive coordinator. There are 2 very obvious ones, and follow me here. The head coach of the Chargers, who's already been fired, in Brandon Staley, and Ron Rivera for the Washington Commanders. Now, who you're thinking, who are their 2 offensive coordinators? For the Chargers, it's Kellen Moore. And if you remember him, he's been an offensive coordinator for the Cowboys, and now he's been an offensive coordinator for the Chargers. He's been working with Justin Herbert. And then, of course, for the Commanders, a very familiar name to a lot of you guys, Eric Bieniemy. We'll get to him in a second. But for Moore, this is a guy who's very young. He's 34 years old. He spent 4 years with the Dallas Cowboys offensive coordinator. 3 out of those 4 years, they had a top 10 scoring offense, has a good track record, worked with Dak Prescott, now with Justin Herbert. Could be a really good young offensive mind to come in, bring in some ingenuity, some innovation, and also bring in the experience to say, hey, I can work with and develop Kenny Pickett, and or if you want to draft Dalen Daniels or whoever you want in the draft, if you want to bring in a new quarterback, I can be that guy that helps cultivate the offense and cultivate a new quarterback for you, and he'd be young, so you have a chance there. Okay, so Kellen Moore. But the obvious name that everyone's going to want to talk about that I just said is Eric Bieniemy. 54 years old, obviously was the coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs for 5 seasons while they had Patrick Mahomes in that offense. And granted, he didn't call the plays in that offense, but he organized the room, much like Eddie Faulkner organizes the room for the Steelers right now, but doesn't necessarily call the plays for the Steelers. But Eric Bieniemy, he's you can say, yeah, he didn't call the plays, but he still coached and organized Patrick Mahomes' offense, worked with them closely, and was a big part of their success. And since he's left, the offense hasn't been exactly too great. Granted, their wide receivers stink now too, but you can look at that. And I'd also say that in his first year with the Commanders, Eric Bieniemy has kind of made Sam Howell look all right at times. Not a lead or anything, but he's done okay there. So, and I think that could be an interesting one. Now, even more interestingly is if you look at Eric Bieniemy's history, he has a tie to Mike Tomlin because both were hired back in 2006 to the same Minnesota Vikings coaching staff. And of course, Mike Tomlin a year later goes on to become the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Bieniemy stuck around for a little bit, bounced around, and then he found his way to Andy Reid years later and became the Bieniemy that we know now. So those are two names that I think give you the proven track record and less of the experiment that the Steelers might be worried about if they went with, a position coach who you're hoping can develop into a coordinator. You're getting an actual coordinator who's had actual success. And again, you're getting these guys from two coaching staffs that are about to be gutted most likely because their whole team's going to be ripped apart and everyone's going to be looking for new answers there. And those are just two options I think the Steelers could have on the table there. But we get back to the point that I made earlier. What offensive coordinator wants to come to this mess of an offense the Steelers are in right now and come here knowing that Mike Tomlin is on the last year of his deal and this could be a lame duck year, and especially with these two guys who they might be about to be out of a job depending on how the Commanders and the Chargers handle their coaching staffs after this year. But they might say, listen, I just left the staff. I'm not trying to have to leave one again. That's where I think the Steelers could play that trick I was talking about earlier. That's where a move I think the Steelers could give themselves that'll just make sure that they can give these guys something a bit of a promise of having something more with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and B, not necessarily tying yourself to Mike Tomlin regardless of his success moving forward. That is actually more dependent on him being more successful in the coming years, putting pressure on him to succeed, but also giving yourself an out if he doesn't. We'll explain that in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. I got a few more points and a few more options the Steelers have right here on the other side of this break. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Get ready for the NFL push to the playoffs as FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, gives you all the best options to make your money betting on NFL games. Remember, new customers, if you sign up for FanDuel today, get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. So whoever you think's going to win, put $5 on the money line, and if you hit, that's $150 in bonus bets back in your FanDuel wallet that you can use right away to make more bets on anything from spreads to player props to over-unders. They have all the different options that you can bet on and all the parlays that you can want on FanDuel. Go to FanDuel today and make sure that you participate in the #1 sportsbook in America so that you can start winning today. And also, don't forget to get this deal. You got to go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, and that'll get you ready for the NFL playoffs and get you ready to make money as you see teams push for the NFL playoffs. And remember, new customers, if you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, you get $150 back in bonus bets by winning any $5 money line bet. That's FanDuel Sportsbook, an official partner of the NFL. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here, and I want to get back to this point here about how to address the lame duck problem, because it could be an issue for offensive coordinators to be like, I don't want to go coach in a system that might get gutted after a year if Mike Tomlin gets fired. Okay, so obvious problem there is Tomlin's on the last year of his deal, and it's not so obvious if the Steelers want to keep him long-term, so an offensive coordinator might not feel safe in making this hire. So there's two ways around that. One of them, let's get this is the second option here that I'm talking about. If we're talking about the three options of how to move forward, the second option, of course, is extending Mike Tomlin. And you could extend him after this year. I don't see that happening right now. But the way that Steelers are at right now, I think the Rooneys want to see something that could pull the Steelers forward to say, hey, all right, Mike's still got it. He's still the guy that we want leading this franchise. And I think the only way that happens after this season, like in this upcoming offseason, is if the Steelers win out, go 10-7, and get a playoff win. And listen, I'm Chris Carter. I'm one of the more look on the bright side type of guys out here in the Pittsburgh media world. I don't see that happen. Let's just be realistic. The Steelers ain't doing all that right now with the way they're playing. And if they do, it'll be a big story that we'll talk about a lot on this show. But let's get realistic. And if you remember earlier in the show, I said there's a trick that they can play to get these offensive coordinators to understand, hey, you may feel you're in a volatile situation that you're jumping out of a fire and into a frying pan that's about to be lit on fire again. This is where you work your way around that. You give yourself a two-way chance of success, or give them, a two-way chance of success and potentially being a head coach. You go to Kellen Moore or Eric Bieniemy, and you say, hey, guys, in the interview, if you guys do come to this offense and turn it around and do a great job turning around at what's been a historically bad offense. Everyone talks about how bad this offense is every single week. We hear all the time, it's a terrible offense. It's been this, and no offense has been this bad. No offense has had this streak of non-400 yard whatevers. So if you turn that offense around in a year's time, 2 years' time, one, Tomlin will get extended because he'll be coaching a better team at that point. But also, as an offensive coordinator, you'll get to write your own check wherever you want, because then everyone will say, "Look, that dude fixed Kenny Pickett. That dude fixed that Steelers offense. I want that guy as my next head coach," and then you will get a payday. So I'd issue that as the first part of my thing to Kellen Moore and Eric Bieniemy as a potential offensive coordinator hire, so that they feel safer about the lame duck experience. But let's say it doesn't go well. Let's say the team doesn't turn things around, and yes, the Steelers do let go of Mike Tomlin and don't extend him after next year. If things don't go that way, you could say, hey, listen, Bieniemy, Moore, as long as you do a good job coaching the offense, even if the rest of the team don't pull it together, you're the next guy. And then they can say, you know what? I have a two-way situation to be a head coach. Either I make this offense work and we become one of the better teams in the NFL, and then I go get a head coaching job very soon after, or I do a good job at my job, but the rest of the team doesn't work because things aren't working under Mike Tomlin. You move on from Mike Tomlin, and then I become your next head coach. And I already have a track record with the organization. Now you have an offensive led team with a head coach, and you have a whole new path with or without Kenny Pickett or whoever you want to work with for the future. That's a situation I think that you could sell to these guys. And again, they'd have to be good at offensive coordinator. If they stink as offensive coordinator for the Steelers and the whole team stinks, then I'd be like, all right, well, we bet on you and you didn't come through. But I think that's something you could sell to guys like Bieniemy, like Moore, like guys who are probably looking and saying, like, I don't know about this situation. I might not have a job after a year if things don't work. But you're telling me that I could either A, fix the offense and get a head coaching job somewhere soon after, or B, just be the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers? I could get with that. I think that's the angle that the Roonies need to employ to get one of these higher level offensive coordinators out here. Because if you're the Roonies, you're also putting yourselves in a two-win situation. Either A, you fix the offense and Mike Tomlin's still your head coach, or you have another option in line already, and you don't have to do a whole blind head coaching search when you get rid of a guy. And I think that is a real path. Let's be real. I talk to people around the Steelers. I just don't see the Steelers firing Mike Tomlin after this year or even trading him. I think that it would break the Rooney code. It would do everything against it. I think the real path is not blindly firing him or trading him away and then having to go through the coaching search and then having to find a guy and hoping that you hit on the right guy there. And I just don't see them doing that. I think it'd be better to give Mike Tomlin a chance to clean things up after what might be his first losing season ever, or just getting him a chance to reclaim things with a new offensive coordinator who could be better. And not only would you give yourself a chance to do that with a coach that you've had success with before, but you'd also have a succession plan in place for if he fails. And I think that just makes the most sense here, right? You give yourself the chance of having the offensive-minded head coach if things don't work out, or you keep the head coach that you know is a good CEO head coach and is respected across the league, and you have that offensive mind on your staff for at least the next 2 to 3 years. And then if things work out and he gets hired as a head coach, all of a sudden, you have your pick of the litter, because then people will say, hey, I want to coach that offense next. And that's the good. I think that is the real path here. That is the path that makes the most sense. But will the Steelers do that? Use that path? I don't know. They haven't exactly made some of the best hires of late, and I think that could that could be a big question for them. But I do think that path makes sense. From again, the people I talked to around the organization and everything, this organization still thinks Mike Tomlin can be the guy that leads this organization, this Steelers, this franchise back to not just winning seasons and just getting over the hump at 9-8, but back to being a Super Bowl contender in some time soon. I do, and I get that sense that because that's the faith that they place him, and that's just how this organization is operated. As I keep bringing up to you guys, a lot of people, when Dan Rooney extended Bill Cowher after he had 3 years in a row missing the playoffs, 2 of those were losing seasons from the late 90s into 2000. A lot of people didn't understand why Dan Rooney extended Bill Cowher, and he said, "Hey, that guy still has people who believe in him. I think he can turn things around." The next year they go 13-3, win one playoff game, get smoked by the Patriots in the next one. But it gave Bill Cowher the time to assemble the core that became the Super Bowl 40 team that won the Steelers their 5th Super Bowl championship. And I think that that's a shining example of why the Rooneys don't make just knee-jerk, this is a bad season, let's fire these guys type of moves. I think that that's part of what's built their success and allowed them to be in the position that they are now. So if they go down this path of getting one of these offensive minds, Kellen Moore and Eric Bieniemy, and there might be more guys. There's always Black Monday in the NFL. At the end of the last day of the NFL season, all sorts of head coaches get fired, and in that situation, all sorts of offensive coordinators become free. But these are 2 offensive coordinators that I think could be at the top of your list for their track record of working with other teams. Again, Moore with the Cowboys, made that Cowboys offense a top 10 scoring unit a lot of times, and just worked with Justin Herbert. Bieniemy obviously worked with Mahomes, has a good track record there, and now did a decent job with Sam Howell. Didn't make them a lead or nothing, didn't make them, obviously they're not really contenders, but you can see merits to what Bieniemy does. You could get one of those guys in your organization and maybe fix your offense that has just looked lifeless for the past few years. That just seems like a plan that you could set yourself up with, either that and or that guy being your next head coach to maybe fix your whole team if Mike Tomlin doesn't after this season. It just makes sense to set yourself up with multiple chances to move onward and upward, and not just one path where if you miss on it, you could risk becoming one of the bottom feeders of the NFL. And if both of those things miss, okay, well, you took your shot. But that's why I think that this is the better path here that the Steelers should take moving forward, because it gives you those options here. And again, it allows you to say, hey, we're giving Mike Tomlin a chance to correct what's been a disappointing end to a good start to a season. When they started 7-4, we're in position to jump into the first seed race of the AFC, and have now fallen flat on their faces to fall to 7-7. And we don't know how that season's going to finish. I don't think it's going to end well with the way they're playing right now, but we don't know. But this way, you give Mike Tomlin a year to correct things. You get a potential future head coach on your coaching staff, or at worst, you have a talented offensive coordinator who can come in and maybe bring in the success that he's instituted in other offenses around the NFL, get new ideas, fresh coaching, fresh offense, and help. And maybe you either find out if Kenny Pickett can be the guy, or you go and get the guy that this coordinator and potential future head coach develops into your next franchise quarterback. That all makes sense to me. Now, will he do it? We'll see. And I think that's why this should be the move, is it gives you those multiple options and potential chances at getting those new offensive minds onto your team. But no matter who the coaches are for the Pittsburgh Steelers, the players have to be better. I specifically didn't talk about the players because we're going to do that on tomorrow's episode, because as y'all know, tomorrow's episode, the Tuesday episode, will be our Stars and Skulls grading episode, where we go over the film. I've already done some All-22 review. I'll probably try to put up some film threads on Twitter on later today, so look out for that. But we'll get to that here. But I wanted to make this episode specifically about the potential coaching paths that the Steelers have in front of them, and why I think that there's multiple options, not just firing Mike Tomlin, not just extending Tomlin, but potentially a middle ground that would make a lot of sense for the Steelers to take if they make some smart moves. Again, we'll get to Stars and Skulls grades for the Steelers' terrible loss to the Colts. As you can expect, it's going to be a graveyard, lots of skulls, and probably some bus tickets too. We'll get to all that and more on the Tuesday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Again, big shout out to my old man, Leonard Carter, Pops, for getting into the City League Hall of Fame here in the city of Pittsburgh. Appreciate you and love you, Pops, as always. Stay tuned for the Locked On Steelers podcast all week long. We're getting ready with your daily episodes on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes. And read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. We'll see you again here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.